everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, I'm joined by Alex. Alex is one of our Discord community members, and he recently played his first big milsim event, Ironhorse 4. And it's always really fun to talk to players who are discovering new facets of Airsoft. So thanks, Alex, first of all, for joining us and agreeing to come on. This is really great to have you.
Hey, I'm just really glad to be here. I've been following the podcast for about a few months now, and I've just always been really looking forward. I always listen to every weekly episode. It's just been very great to hear. Was really always hoping that someday I would be able to say like maybe some experiences I could be able to give. So yeah, I'm just really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. So how long have you been playing Airsoft?
So I started playing Airsoft when I would say give or take by about when I was 14. It was a friend of mine who I'm still best friends with, where he was into Airsoft and he let me know about it. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. So then after I went to my first one and after he covered my rental when I was there, and I saw that, man, this is a hobby I really want to get into. So then I just managed to, whatever spare money I had, I just kept putting into it and just made sure to keep playing with him. And it was just a really great experience all throughout my grade school years. I managed to play for a little bit after grade school, but I just found that between college and work, it was just sort of something where I had to step out. I stepped out for about 4 years. And then it was last year by about, I would say April, where I was starting to sort of rediscover it again, where I just started to get back into it. So I was just like, oh yeah, I want to get back into this. I feel like I'm in a position where I can be able to play this, at least to some extent. And then got back into it, remembered how fun it was again, and just sort of re-emerging myself. And it was especially good now because this time I actually had disposable income to put into the hobby that was consistent.
Yeah.
I always found Airsoft being in grade school. I always say that there are three main obstacles when it comes to playing Airsoft, which was always money, time, and transportation. Grade school, I had the time, but not money or transportation, at least not consistently. I got a job. I had money and time, but not transportation yet. This time I sort of flipped, and now I have it where it's like money and transportation, but time is sort of limited because I work weekends. But at least I am able to take time off, at least periodically, to be able to go into it. And so finally, once I saw that I had everything I needed, I'm like, okay, I wanted to step into milsim because I was always really into it because I remembered watching when Airsoft GI, like about 10 or so years ago, they used to do milsims with lion claws, and they would record videos there. And it's like, oh man, this looks really fun. I want to try doing it based on their experiences. So then I decided to look around, but I decided for my first milsim, I didn't want to try to go to somewhere that was going to be a long distance. Like say I would have to go on a plane, rent a car, deal with the hassle of transporting all my Airsoft guns and gear. So I want something I could just drive there. And then it was actually, I think was Chas who mentioned that it was going to be in Perry, Georgia. So I'm like, oh, let me see how far that is. And it was only 5 hours from where I live. So I'm like, okay, sweet. I really want to go get into it. And so that's how that started.
Yeah. So before we get into the milsim, I'm curious, what is the airsoft scene like local to you? Like, we don't have to go into like specifically where you live, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But like, what is the airsoft scene sort of local to you? Like, what types of games do you play? Are there lots of fields around where you live?
So in Florida, I would say the scene actually kind of died out in many respects, not fully, but I found that in the Central Florida area, which is where I live, because I live in Orlando. So I found that it actually is non-existent, the airsoft scene here. We used to have about like 2 or 3 fields that were owned by the same guy. But it turns out that like about the same year I went on my hiatus, they all shut down. So now for airsoft, when I want to play, I have to go to either North or South Florida. So when I first went back into it, I actually went to Miami Airsoft because in Florida, we only have 2 indoor fields, one that is in Miami and one that's in Jacksonville. So I went to the Miami one. I took a day off so I could try going there, which is my reintroduction, which is really fun. And then I now frequently play at Battalion Airsoft in Jacksonville because unlike most other fields, they're actually open on weekdays for specific times on the school district. So, like, say, President's Day, maybe time for the holidays, spring break, things like that. So that's how I've been generally playing airsoft at Battalion because they're the main ones that accommodate my hours.
Right.
But otherwise, when it comes to playing airsoft, I regularly have to travel about 2 hours, give or take, to go to any given field that I'd like to go, and I'd have to put time off in advance. So I would say that it is a bit more challenging in many respects, but I found fortunately I'm in a good enough position to where I can be able to deal with it. Like even if I can't play nearly as much as say some people can typically do in the server, it's at least something that I've been able to make work.
Totally. It's funny you mentioned Jacksonville, just put completely randomly. My grandfather trained as a naval aviator in Jacksonville, Florida in World War II,
Wow.
as a free French. So, anyways, it just popped into my head because I remember seeing his like graduation certificate where it said like Naval Air Station Jacksonville or whatever. Anyways, just a random thought.
Uh,
So, prior to hitting Iron Horse, what would you say would have been like your most immersive airsoft experience?
I'm not really. I'd say the closest one was actually at Combat City, an event that was called North versus South. That I don't really know if that event exists anymore, but the field unfortunately closed. Where that was
Hmm.
about maybe as closest as it was there, because the one thing was that admission was actually free for anybody who came in, which is something that they only did during that event. And it would be players from all over coming in. I heard people from South Florida, North Florida, out of state like Georgia, even as I think some of them were even I met some people who even came from Washington.
Oh
So
wow.
like lots of people were coming over to this event. And it was like a very big event. They did have some organization and they were actually using the entire field, which they typically don't do because it was a lot of acres. Can't remember. It may have been something like 3,000 square foot of acres or something like that.
Wow.
But yeah, they had like a lot of acres left, and so it was the only time the year they used all of it. But it was still a far cry from how I at least Milsim was described to me, mainly because because in this case there was some communication, but there weren't things like uniform requirements. You still got to go in with whatever guns or gear you had. As
Right.
far as objectives, they were kind of loosely structured. Mainly, it was take specific points that were sort of dotted around the map and such, things like that. So it was about as close, but I would say it only gave like sort of what I would call very Milsim light, basically.
Milsim Light. Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So now thinking about Iron Horse in particular, like what was the lead up for that for you? Like, how did you prep for it? How did you connect with Chaz? Like, how did that all shake down?
So I met Chas actually through our Discord server. So like because he when he saw that I said that I was going to be going there, we would go chat up. And so how I prepped for it was that I was trying to look at what exactly people typically brought to the field when they went on Milsim games, and making sure that I could be able to do accordingly. So I already imagined that I was never going to get my kit perfect regardless, because obviously what's the proper kit always depends on the person in question. So I just
Hmm.
went with what I had. So what I first did was I actually bought a second M81 Woodland uniform because my hotel, at least I didn't know if they were going to have any washer or dryer. So I bought two just so that way I could be able to take that off when I got back to the hotel, showered, slept, woke up, and I had another one ready to go. Which
That's a
essentially,
great idea,
yeah,
dude. That is an excellent idea.
so that's what I did, and I would say personally, I recommend doing that well, I'll get more into that, but because that day I was so tired that there was no way I was going to be able to have enough time to wash it, so that panned out well. And then I looked into getting my hydration carrier. So I bought myself a hydration pack backpack. It was one that I got from Condor, where it was one that actually came with a bladder and straw. So I was just like, okay, so I would go with that because I figured the backpack maybe I would carry some stuff for it, because I was thinking that I was going to carry the speed loader in there. That actually was where I met was a mistake I made because I didn't know speed loaders were allowed on the field, because admittedly my turns out my information on it was dated, because when I looked at the Airsoft GI Milsim videos they did like at 2012 to 2014, they actually were allowed to carry theirs, but the sidewinders didn't exist yet. Then when
Right.
Kath told me that, oh, like that wasn't allowed, I felt like that's where I made a mistake on it. So I think for future events, I'm probably just going to go with a standard hydration carrier and probably just axe the backpack because I didn't find myself using it. So
Right.
that's what I got for that. Decided to go with a 3 liter, and I'm glad they came with that because I'm a person who drinks a lot of water, and I found that 3 liters was really helpful to be able to carry. I just kind of feel with water, the more you can carry, the better, personally.
100%, yeah. And I mean, to be honest, like when you think about, I mean, I obviously haven't played a Muslim like that, but even just thinking about hiking, like with my wife and I, when we go hiking, like what is the difference in weight really between like a 2 liter and a 3 liter? Like, yeah, it's a kilogram, but like you really don't notice the difference, but you definitely notice the missing extra liter of water, right?
Yeah, you really, really will.
Yeah.
So that's why I decided to go with that. So because of this, though, because I didn't know how much it would weigh, because I never wore, because I only really have a plate carrier that I have. I have a tan chest rig, but I didn't know if that was going to be allowed because of uniforms. So I'm like,
Hmm.
I'll just go with my green plate carrier because I already have that because I've been using that for CQB. So since I've never been at an op or any sort of event where I wore gear for like basically like about 10 hours, give or take. I've never worn it
Yeah.
that long before. So I decided I would try the PC because that's about as heavy as you could reasonably carry for a piece of kit and decide to see how that would go. So I would say it still turned out okay, but I definitely can say from that, I felt I was carrying way too much weight. So I do think for the next stop, I will actually be asking the PC for a chest rig instead, just so I can really cut down those pounds on it. I also am glad that Chaps also recommended for me because he saw that I usually carry my 1911 on me, saying that it would be best if you axe that, just because like he said you want to make sure that you're carrying less for a big op where you're out for hours. And I would say I'm really glad I took that advice because I would have been much more tired even with something like that that would have weighed probably an extra 2 3 pounds probably.
Yeah, like they say, like ounces equals pounds and pounds equals pain
I remember
or
that.
whatever,
That's why
right?
I kept that in mind.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, so you mentioned Chaz and like you mentioned that you guys connected via the Discord. So how did that all work in terms of meeting up with them at the game?
So me and Chassis actually DM'd me and said that he asked if I was going with anybody, and I said no. That was actually from friends and family who were always asking me. That's like, oh, are you gonna bring like your girlfriend or anyone else? Because my girlfriend plays airsoft as well. She didn't want
Hmm.
to go to Ironhorse because she felt that Milsim just didn't seem like the sort of thing that appealed to her. She saw the
Yeah.
appeal, but she felt like it was going to be fun for her. So I was only gonna go by myself because this was going to be an expensive event. Like the tickets were about 270 ish a piece, basically, like really expensive tickets. And even more so, I'd have to convince them to front the money there, as well as also come with me to Georgia, a 5 hour trip where I'm like, we're probably not going to be home until Monday, basically, because I left Friday morning.
Hmm.
So for all that stuff, so I was just going to go on my own. And Sam on the Discord and chats, like they were saying, like, oh, like probably best to go on there. And so since I was going in chats and his group of people were going, he's like, hey, so why don't you come join me and my guys, and that with you, so that way we could be able to go just play together, so we can just make sure that you can have the best time that's there. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, I'm up for that. So therefore, they really managed to help me with also giving me general tips on things, like mainly to give me tips. I'd say what to bring though. Like they recommended I get the mechanics gloves that I just managed to buy recently, and because mainly I did know I want to get full finger gloves because when I'm in urban areas like this, I often expect at AOs that there's going to be things like rubble, broken glass, things like also like especially because there was a forested area, so things like rocks, twigs, any of that, and I didn't want my fingers like touching those or like cutting anything like that.
Yeah, that's
So
legit.
so therefore I managed to get those, and man, those worked out really well because the only other pair of full finger gloves I wore were the Vulcan full finger ones that were having the, I guess, rubber finger parts, and I felt they were really too bulky. I felt like when I tried to get through the trigger guard, I would sometimes just press the trigger on accident. So going with
Hmm.
these that were way slimmer, they still had the guarding on everything on the fingers except the index finger, which I felt was probably why it had that extra bulk because that area was armored. But yeah, so having that was really good. Especially brought my knee pads with it, and man, I'm really glad I brought them because it saved my knees so much pain and would have really messed them up if I didn't have them for that. So they managed to give me a lot of tips as well as like how we were going to be going, how we were going to be coordinating. They actually gave me a set of, I was able to borrow a set of Howard Lights headset that I always was using because grenades and things like that were going off regularly. And those things really saved me a lot. Saved me a lot because they managed to protect my hearing because explosives were going off very frequently, either in buildings or at least close enough to where at least they were pretty loud. and I managed to have that. And they also managed to give me a radio so that I was able to keep in contact with them. Was really beneficial, and I'm glad that Steve was actually the person Chas brought that really managed to let me borrow it. And that radio was a really big help. I was able to relay information to them and let them know what was going on, all that good stuff. And it just really helped me with that. So happy they managed to help me borrow that, just so they could make sure that I was as equipped as I could reasonably be while I was over there.
It's funny because like they always tell you don't talk to strangers on the internet or whatever, but like it sounds like I mean our communities although we are strangers technically, I think we spend a lot of time talking to each other. So it
Yeah.
sounds like you were able to just, despite the fact that you didn't really know each other in sort of real space, real life, so to speak, meet
Mhm.
space, if you want to call it,
Yeah.
you were able to actually meet and sort of mesh pretty well, even just out the gate, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like we managed to really be able to go well. They were very respectful for me. I liked how friendly they were being, always answering my questions, because like they saw, because I was always upfront. That's like, hey, this is going to be my first milsim. Like that's always the thing. Like this is my first milsim. Period. I've never done anything like this. So they were very patient. They were always answering any questions I had, giving me suggestions, all that good stuff. So was really happy for that. We really meshed well. And then when I got to meet them, they just had like big smiling faces. They were just so happy to see me when I actually got to meet them on Friday when I was doing my registration. Like really, I'm just so happy I got to go with them, because if I was just going by it myself and I just simply just basically was assigned to some random squad there, who even knows if it still would have been as good. Still would have been great, but if it would have been as great as it could have been.
So I've got a question for you now, and it's a two-parter. All right. So the first part
Yeah.
is thinking about the event and how you were getting ready for it. What was the part that was the most intimidating for you, as especially like as someone who never done it before?
So in this case, it was particularly that this was an op where you just go all day out though, because even at Ironhorse, not Ironhorse, at North versus South, there were still designated like plenty of breaks, so you could just go like just basically hang out at the basically at the little break area that was always there and just be there as long as you want. Whereas like in this case, I was going to be out for that. Like it's not that you have to be out for all like 10 hours or however long we played there. Like it didn't have to be that level of intense, but the thing is that you were expected to be out there for the majority. Like if you went back to the fob, like get some water, rearm. Like if you're hungry, just try to get something quick that you can eat, and just try to be back out there ASAP, because we need everyone who's on our team. Like we need them all out there. That wasn't really the part that was most intimidating for that. But I still felt that that was actually something I was still excited to experience, because this was something I'd never done before. And I thought that would have provided a really great kind of immersive experience. Because again, despite the name, I'm aware that Milsim does not remotely simulate real combat, though. I'm aware of that. But still, I felt like, oh, that's just really fun, though. A notion where it's like we just play all day. We go at it with everything that we have. And it was just and even though there was an intimidation factor, I kind of felt it was more hyping me up to do it though than anything, ironically, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. And so I guess the second part of the question was thinking about that being intimidating. Did you find that it actually worked out that way? Like once you started playing, did that intimidation sort of just evaporate for you?
Yeah, intimidation just it evaporated just immediately. It was just so great when I was actually out there, and ironically, I found that my gear setup worked out overall better there, because when we actually played, it was really cold. It was like something like about 45-ish degrees Fahrenheit outside. Like it was really cold. I remember Chas and the rest of our squad, they were clearly freezing. They wore jackets. And my PC actually kept me pretty warm throughout it, which I was surprised, because it's actually a smaller profile one, sort of like one that I had. It was basically like above, sort of a little bit above my lower stomach. And it was surprisingly keeping me really warm inside. It kept me all throughout there. And then when I was out there all day, I didn't find the gear being something that I found was like really weighing me like super badly. I still want to try to slim, but I still felt like once I was out there, I'm like, oh, carrying my gear all day actually doesn't feel nearly as bad as I was maybe thinking it was going to be. So I just kept at it, and it was just a lot of fun to be able to go and do that. And I'm like, man, like I'm really getting into this. I really had my suspicions confirmed that I want to do this.
Yeah, totally. And so I guess now's as good a time as any. Talk a little bit about what was the op actually like in terms of the gameplay. Like, how did the day, or I guess days plural, how did they work out?
So on Saturday, so Friday was where I drove in, where I just went to registration. And on Saturday, it was essentially that we had three main areas, which was the village, the tunnels, and the city. So those were the areas we had to grab, as well as also command posts that were sort of scattered all around. So the way that was sent was that me and Chas and our team, we were sent to go secure one of the buildings in the city. So we immediately rushed over towards that. It was one that was right across from the tunnels, and our job was to make sure that we held that. Admittedly, this is where I sort of had to remind myself as to how different this is, because in standard pickup play, whether I was playing indoor or outdoor, there was always the impetus that's basically once you cap an objective, rush to the next one and kind of keep tagging all there, always being in the front of the action. Whereas Milsim really had to I had to really remind myself that this isn't that sort of thing where ironically kills, while obviously good to have, they're ironically I found on the lower end of things that can be important, where it was more so about defending where you have and then trying to make sure you keep it, as opposed to necessarily all about pushing, though of course that's important too. So that's where, like, for me, I found the games mainly going. Mainly, it was just sort of attacking and defending locations and making sure that we took what ground we could and held on to that. I wasn't sure about the enemy team because I didn't talk to many members on the UFS. Yeah, so I guess that explained the acronyms. So there were two teams that was there. Cost, which is the team we were on, and then USF. Those were the two factions that were there, and that was actually one of the things that drew me, because it wasn't typical NATO/American versus Russian, where it was instead more of a pseudo sort of Civil War faction-ish kind of thing, which I found fun. But yeah, the game times were mainly just attack and defend, mainly going there, securing ground, and then moving up from that securing ground onwards. I found that's how both teams were always acting, where we always wanted to make sure our areas were secured first, and then we would push up if we felt that there was a big enough opening for us to send forces through. And I also
Gotcha.
found the games to also be very interesting, because this is the first time I would say that deaths were something that actually were mattering, or rather getting hit was what mattered most here. Because at standard pickup games, and even when I played like about one or two Speak QB matches, where usually death is not something that's the biggest deal, like, walk to your respawn, that's probably only about a few minutes at the most, and then you get back into it. Whereas here, you only get two revives from your medics, and then I found that when walking back, it was quite the walk, though, for me to do so. Like, it took a lot of time for me to get back into it, between going to the fob, getting my mags reloaded, and all that stuff, and making sure to make sure I was all prepped to go back into it. So when playing the game, I had to also try to teach myself to be much more careful and not to be like so being in the enemy space, I guess, like I would be in CQB. I had to really try to hone that down as well, though, because because in CQB, especially, since the main thing is about getting kills, and I had to really try to remind myself that's not it's important, but not the most important thing having to play this.
Yeah, for sure. You got to hold your corner or whatever. What I was gonna ask is, like, you mentioned like the walk. I know Chaz was complaining to me about that. He said like I did like 28,000 steps or whatever on Saturday. So like how like this AO the area of operation, I should say, like the Milsim area was huge, right?
Mhm. It was really big, like, because at least what I always told people, that the facility we were at was actually a place that is meant for training official government agencies, so like law enforcement, EMS, firefighters, all those kinds of people. And I saw the various areas that they were meant to train, like one building that was completely collapsed, I guess mainly for like firefighters to be able to teach and such. And it was a really big AO between the city, the tunnels, as well as also the village. Like, there's a lot of walking that you do there, which is especially what taught me as to why exactly where even small weight decreases, if you can do that, matter so much, because it's a long walk, and you can especially you'll especially be feeling the burn while you're trying to do so. So
So
that's
how
where
long was it to walk back generally, just roughly?
to walk back, it was actually something like about, I would say probably something like about 15 minutes, give or take, it would take for me
Oh
to
wow.
go. So like something like that to be able to walk back to. My reloading and my hydrating would probably take like another 5 minutes, I would do, and then it would be about another 10 to 15 to try to walk back to my squad if I could reach them, or if not that, excuse me, at least being able to get in, and so I can make sure I could secure ground where I could.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's quite a trek, like especially I think about like the skirmishes that we play on the weekend or whatever. Like you get hit and you're walking off the field and it's like legit like 60 seconds tops to get back to
Mhm.
the safe zone or whatever, right? Like
Exactly.
totally. So so you were doing that. Did you get a chance to play like on all the like different areas like in the tunnels and in the village, and did you get to see all of that like in play?
Yes, I actually managed to. So the first area we hit in was the city. So that's what we wanted to go and secure. And we did manage to do a great job of holding the city. So then once we felt that the tunnels were at least ill defended enough, we then did proceed to go into the tunnels. There wasn't much left of UFS there. From what I understood, they were mainly the inside the tunnels was clear, but mainly they were holding the doorways that lead inside them, so that entering them would more or less be a death sentence, though, because they just pop the door open and start shooting. So then we managed to secure that, and then I proceeded all the way to the village. I was going with other cops forces as we tried to go in and make sure that we could secure that. And then that was where it was the village where I first lost both lives at, because I lost two in the city, and then that was where someone dealt like the killing blow, so to speak. So afterwards, that's when I had to trek back. And by the time I got back, we actually were doing some good progress within the city. And then there was another cool moment where once I got back and Chas and the rest of them came back, we actually managed to get a special order. I think it was from commander or our platoon leader. I can't fully remember who. Where we actually came up with a plan where we were going to take one of the U-Haul trucks that we had, where it was going to take us around from where our fob was, basically behind enemy lines, and then we were going to take a CP that was there. So then afterwards, we end up going into the forest area. We started going into through the forest. There was like really tall grass, lots of trees, etc. And through that was definitely a real experience, because I actually had to be on my knees for a lot of it. I never had to be on my knees that much before ever playing airsoft, and it made me just that much more thankful I had my knee pads. But specifically the hard shell ones, I was running Hatch X-Tac knee pads on there, and I felt like I was really glad for that. But fortunately, the knee pads also have plenty of padding on the inside, so that way
Hmm.
my knees don't feel like they're just leaning on something hard, which was really useful. So
Yeah,
definitely,
dude, knee pads, they're not just for show. Guys, if you're listening and you don't have knee pads, listen to Alex. Get knee pads.
like, yeah, I was on my knees for that, because we were really trying to make sure we were not caught, because the U-Haul trucks weren't just for us, but it was for the enemy team as well. So there were a couple instances they would pick up UFS forces and ferry them to the field so that they could just kind of get right into it. There were only a
Oh,
few,
gotcha.
yeah, there were only a few like what's the word for it though? Basically, a few drops where they would take UFS forces and drop them into the field. So we made sure that we were trying to lay really low, so that they made sure that they didn't catch us while we were going through there. So then we were just making sure we went through very carefully. There was a trailer park area that we managed to go breach. We wanted to make sure that it was secure, so we did that. And then we got on top of these really steep hills, which made me really happy for my boots, because they really helped keep my ankle secure and made sure that I wasn't going to trip or fall or anything like that.
Hmm.
And so we managed to see their CP that was like really close, like basically flirting with that 100-yard lane, which is basically like you cannot, if you're cost or USF or UFS, you can't step within 100 yards of each other's fobs, because you need to get people out. So it was
Yeah.
the CP that was closest to their fob, and we managed to look out for it. And so I was just mainly tasked with making sure that no one stuck up behind us. And so like it looked all secured, but turns out there were some guys that were tracking us that we couldn't see, and then they wiped us out shortly after
Oh,
we
no.
got there. And then like I still had bandages, but they have a rule which is where if you down somebody and then you go up and you say searching, that's treated as if as if they are fully eliminated and have to walk back. So like we just talked about, and they were just like, oh yeah, we were tracking you guys. Like we saw you guys go in the forest, and we tried our best to keep hidden as we were tracking you guys. And then we just took you guys out after. And it was just like, it was such a, we weren't even mad that it happened or we didn't proceed. It was just so fun that we did all that. We didn't even care. We were just like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, good game, guys. Like that was real awesome.
that's awesome. Chaz had mentioned to me about the U-Haul trucks, and he had told me to ask you about it, so you brought it up, so that's great. So I guess like you were saying, those were just really a mode of transportation for like the game admins more than anything, right? Like,
Yeah, they were mainly just a way of like getting people inside of it. So it was mainly their way of like say there were only a few of these. So it wasn't like they were just constantly running through the field, dropping people off or anything like that. There was only like a few drops they did for both sides. I think it was only like three or four that they
Okay.
did, mainly so that way it wouldn't get crazy with having that. Because the main rule about the trucks was that you weren't allowed to shoot the players inside. It wasn't until the players actually stepped out that you could actually do so. So just for gameplay purposes, they only did about three or four runs of the trucks for both sides throughout the entirety of that Saturday. So we just managed to use that one. It was the only time I was on the truck really, but even still, it was really cool to try to have that, to sort of have that simulated drop, so to speak, like just putting you right into the hot zone and heading out. Just such a really fun experience. Like I'm definitely going to keep telling that story for years to come.
For sure. So that was Saturday. What was Sunday like?
So on Sunday, because the main guy who was leading it, he said that apparently that there was even some abuse with the trucks, that they were, I guess, maybe dropping people into areas they weren't supposed to be. So for Sunday, they actually axed the trucks, and whenever anything was happening, we had to get to everywhere on our own. So Sunday was definitely a really interesting one, but especially because like even though my mind was really wanting to go into it, that Sunday, my body was like, oh my God, I am so exhausted after that Saturday because we played until 11 and I didn't get to my hotel until about, I would say 12 because I had to do a lot of packing, prep, and all that, basically making sure I got everything back. And man, like I was so exhausted. And I was even told by, I think it was either Chance or Steve, our squad leader, that often for Sunday games, only half the people from Saturday show up on Sunday because by that point everyone's so physically exhausted and they just a lot of them just can't bring themselves to wake up and just try to do that because we had to be there. The briefing was supposed to be at 9:30, but because there was a lot of people who were showing up late, they decided to delay it. So then I think it was by about, I would say 10:30 where they finally resumed with the briefing and making sure that everything was done. Chaz and the rest of our guys, they did eventually come, but it was much later in the AO, much later in the day, which I didn't mind because I can understand it was really tiring. And so I can imagine why they just had to catch a few extra hours of shut eye before going out for that. And so there for Sunday, we were just proceeding well. And Saturday, especially, I was more prepped on Sunday because on Saturday, we learned that we had actually fully captured the city, the village, the tunnels, and all CPs on that Saturday by the end of the night. And
Oh,
it
wow.
just got us like really, I think it was even maybe another person of our platoon leadership where he was saying like, I didn't think you guys could do better last year, which I wasn't there though, but I'm presuming was really good. He's like, but yeah, you guys really did it. So he's like, we're going to try to do our best to make sure we can hold the same ground. And on Sunday, as we were proceeding, UFS actually managed to capture the city on there on that day. And so we did eventually manage to do some progress in there. But man, UFS really managed to showed up for Sunday, and they were really holding us, even though we outnumbered them like 2-1, something like that. Like even still, they were doing really amazing.
So did you outnumber them on day one, or is it just people basically not showing up on the second day because of the tiredness you were talking about?
We were pretty evenly numbered. It was mainly the following day where we majorly outnumbered them just because so many people were so tired. Because I was told that a lot of people don't show up on day two because they're just too exhausted to try to
Yeah.
do so. And after I did that, I was like, oh man, now I can understand what he meant. Because even when I was waking up, like I remember the Sunday I woke up, I did like some on my bathroom sink. I did like a few push-ups just to get my heart pumping though, because I was told that exercising in the morning can really increase your heart rate so that you can try to wake up better. And I took an
Hmm.
extra shower. I took one the night before, but I took another one in the morning just so I could try to really wake myself up and try to make it to where I could have like full attention while I was going because I was so like worn out by that. And fortunately, I had all my clothes and such laid out so that way I could just put my stuff on and then get out. That Sunday, even though my typical thing when I go to a field is to have camo pants, boots, and then a shirt, I wasn't even bothering, and I just went with my combat shirt on. But fortunately, because I guess in Georgia, nobody cares, nobody thinks twice if you dress that way. So I was just like, you know what, screw it, I'll just do that because this is Georgia, no one cares.
Yeah, fair
They'll
enough.
just ask like, oh, are you guys like going hunting or something? I think that was something similar you mentioned where you were like, they would just be like, oh, those, I think they were like part of the hunting people or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. People used to do that all the time. It's like, are you part of the? Well, this in Newfoundland we call it the militia, but it's what you guys would call like the reserves or like the National Guard or whatever. So they'd be like,
Mhm,
"Are you a part of the militia?" We'd like, "Yes, yeah, that's what we're doing."
mhm.
So yeah, I totally feel yeah. So thinking about overall, like your experience, like what would you say? The biggest lesson that you learned, aside from what we've talked about so far about like water and like weight and stuff like that, what
Mhm.
was the biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway for you for the last for those days?
I feel the biggest lesson I had to really learn was especially patience. Because on there, like as I said, because like in CQB, because these are very fast-paced games, you're kind of expected to be all over doing everything that you possibly can. This is a game that I really had to learn to just try to hunker that down, try to make sure to understand that no, just because you're not being out in the field getting all these kills and whatever. And I felt like because on some level, not fully, but on some level, I felt like I was internalizing a lot of the Milsim videos I watched from like the old Airsoft GI days, even Desert Fox videos on there, because often those guys would be more at the forefront of it, mainly just being like wherever the heat of the battle was. And so, like, because I wasn't there, there was like some feeling that's like, oh, I got to be there to be useful. But I had to really try to, as I try to always keep reminding myself, that's like, hey, what you're doing is important. You're already holding one piece of what we have to do. And as long as you hold this, you're really doing your part here. So I feel like that's especially something where if I ever saw like people who were new, is to try to make sure they can have that internalized, because I do admit this is kind of one of the, when it comes to gameplay videos on Airsoft, sort of one of the parts of it, because I understand it's a business. You got to always do what you can do to get the most exciting footage, because like a lot of Milsim videos will always try to show them being at the forefront of it. Some of them will even admit that they break off what they're supposed to do so that they can be in the forefront of it, so they can get the all that good footage and such. So that's why I didn't internalize it fully, because I understood that that's not how it was. But I did feel like I internalized that to enough of a degree where I had to really try to stop myself from trying to think that I had to do all that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that's a fair statement. And I know like you see guys like who have big YouTube channels or whatever, they're going to milsims and like flying in helicopters and stuff, and like the average milsim attendee isn't probably not going to be zipping around in a helicopter, right? Like,
Yeah. Like we didn't even have technicals this year. I don't know if Ironhorse typically runs them, because mainly Bo and the guys at American Milsim, they had to really fight really hard to get Guardian Center, because apparently it's a big place that they were trying to do. So they had to do, I think that maybe like no vehicles, or at least none of the technicals as they're called, were really allowed to be in play. I don't know what the full thing was there, but they just weren't able to. And like, yeah, that's one of the things you see, because often when you look at Milsim videos online, one of the things they always love highlighting is mainly when technicals or especially helicopters or things like that are in play. Often things they do so. Whereas I found like in that one there wasn't that, which I wasn't bummed by. I just kind of treat those as like sort of nice if you have it, but you know, if you don't, it's not going to prevent me from coming if I want to go.
yeah, totally. So we talked about at the start as well. Like, I mean, you're not new to airsoft. Like, you've been playing for several years. But what are some like skills that you learned at the milsim with Chaz and Sam and all those guys that maybe you hadn't been exposed to before?
Communication was a whole different ballgame when it came to playing at Iron Horse. Learning that you like how good you can communicate is going to be such a big drastic thing, not just for your team immediately, but also because when you learn things that maybe you could spot that the rest of your team doesn't, you can relay
Yep.
that to your squad leader, who can relay that to command, and they can get that to the other squad leaders, so that way they can make sure that they can proceed accordingly. So I found that at Milsim, especially, communication is such a big deal and something that you really have to stay on top of, because the more stuff that your team as a whole knows, the better that it can be to do so. Because like as I learned when it came to the objectives, that it wasn't merely just taking them, but also you have to let someone know, typically your platoon leader, where you let them know, hey, like, you know, we got building 23 secure. So then they hear that, and then your platoon leader radios that to command. So that way they can make sure they know. So that way they can know that, yes, that is under our control. And so that way we don't have forces going into buildings that are us expecting that maybe there's enemies in there. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
really
legit.
learned how much communication matters there. And I really want to try to make sure I keep learning how to be able to do that better.
Totally. And I mean, hey, listen, that's a skill that we're all always working on all the time. So I totally feel you. What is something that you wish that you learned by the end of it that you wish you had known on day one?
I really wish I knew how to actually make my gear weighed better because it was, even if it
Yeah.
wasn't as heavy as it could have possibly been, it was still, I found that there were plenty of deficiencies where I found that maybe I was carrying too much weight. So like the backpack, I felt like I really didn't need because I didn't carry much in there because when I bought it, I was under the impression I would carry like a bottle of BBs and my speed loader in there, and then
Hmm.
I would just reload on the field. But then I learned like about a couple of months later that that wasn't something you were allowed to do in American Milsim games. It was intended where you would only reload at the fob. So I feel like that was something I wish I would have kept because that would have been a lot of extra weight I wouldn't have had to carry. And definitely the plate carrier because like I prefer wearing that in CQB, but I started having the suspicions, which I felt Ironhorse confirmed, that if I'm playing outdoor games, it's just better to go lighter weight because, well, one, you have more of the sun on you, whereas in indoor slash CQB games, usually the sun isn't as on you as it is in those. So I feel like I'm probably going to axe that, try to look around for, try to try out different chest breaks so I can make sure I get something that can really help lower the weight on that. And so try to make sure I do that and to know how important weight management is, making sure to really just carry what you need. If at worst, maybe carry a little bit more than what you need, but try not to have it be by that much.
Right on. So, last question for you. We all have these moments playing airsoft, not all the time, but certainly frequently enough,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what was that moment for you at Iron Horse 4 where you're like, you just can't believe you're doing this? Like, this is the coolest thing, right?
It was when I was actually the night game proceeding that was on Saturday. I think like when things started getting really dark by about 8 o'clock. For context, I've never played a night game before. Usually, fields around me have never really either they've never done them or when they've done them, I just was never available to go play at it. So, because usually night games I find are more something they announce spontaneously as opposed to way in advance.
Gotcha.
So this was the first time I actually experienced it in full, and just being in there and just doing and just actually being around, just doing all that cool stuff that I always hope to do, like being with other squad mates, just being able to do things like say going up buildings. That was the first time where I was actually in a building that stairwells were in play because usually if there's ever a building that's in any field, usually it's only like one story. It's not meant to simulate like something with stairs. So therefore,
Right.
like I had to really learn how to having that where I had to be really quiet when going up. Like I like to joke with some of the people there who said the same. Where like it felt like straight up Call of Duty stuff at times, though it felt fun for that very reason. So like when doing that stuff, it was like, man, like this is exactly what I was in for, and I'm just so happy I got to do all this. It just was a fantastic experience to play that night game as well. Especially just being able to be with people who are having a lot of fun. Us being all dorky. I remember it was on Sunday where especially show me how fun, especially show me how like how it was supposed to be, where we were taking out a building, but we didn't know if anyone was on the third floor. So one of them had a tag launcher that they were going to shoot in from outside to inside because you were allowed to do that. So we were just talking Star Wars stuff being on there, just being like, oh, stay on target. And so he actually hit just outside the wall though. So we were just making jokes like, oh, negative, negative. It didn't go in. It impacted on the surface. And we were just being such huge dorks. And it reminded me, this is why I love doing what I do.
Yeah, well, that sounds like an amazing time. Obviously, you're going to be looking at doing another milsim at some point. Any plans right now? Anything on the calendar?
So for me, not this year, because this year my plan is to buy a new place to move into. I'm trying to get either an apartment or maybe like a duplex, like I plan to move into. So my funds are going to be after this point. I have to go focus on making sure I get that up. But
Yeah, I
next
feel you.
year, but next year I actually want to go to the American Millsip off Copperhead, which takes place in Arizona, I believe. That's an event I really want to do. So because of where I am though and how much money I make, I don't feel like at most I can maybe do two mil sims, one where I fly, and if there's another Iron Horse next year, go to that one. But this was my only one for this year. And honestly, despite how expensive the whole thing was, I found it completely worth it. I'm completely happy with what I had there. It honestly could not have gone any better, in my opinion, for how it went. So I definitely want to make sure that when I go to Copperhead next year, that I try to make sure I go onto that, especially because it would be the first time I actually flew to the West Coast because I've been on the East Coast my whole life. So that would be quite the experience. And I definitely want to make sure that in ops to come, I will definitely be making sure I put a lot of emphasis on doing those because I want to do more of these and as many of these as I can squeeze in.
Totally, I hear you. Plus, I've been told West Coast, best coast is a thing, so there's that.
Mhm.
Thanks so much for joining us, Alex. I mean, it was awesome to hear about your experience at Iron Horse 4 and just, this kind of milsim. Hopefully, it's something that we're going to be able to get to experience as well. Like, we've never had a chance, any of us on the team, to play that kind of milsim. So, but just talking to you and Chaz and everyone else on the Discord, and by the way, guys, if you're not a member of the Discord community, the link is in the description. But it's really sounds like something that'd be, right up our alley. So I'm just thrilled that you were able to join us.
All right, definitely glad to be here.
Thank you so much for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you next week.